Okay, with regard to the point that you made about freedom of choice, and these are all words. I'm very surprised to say that these are basically words. When you have different religious life, for example, not just India, but the United States of America. And what is very interesting is that no matter how violent that society is, the United States of America, a secular state, and the United States doesn't really have a problem of communal violence of the kind that India has. It's a modern, multicultural, multi-religious society. And much of the reason for this, of course, is that whatever many criticisms one can make about the United States of America, it is a secular state which is in many ways stronger. And what the difference between India and the United States is that in the United States, religious groupings can certainly have influence on particular policies. But there is no danger of them taking over the secular state of the United States and making it a communal state in the same way that, say, for example, Hindu communalism can do, or in fact, the communal state of Israel. So given these different histories, given the much greater implantation and strength of democratic norms and values, you can have balancing mechanisms of a kind which you don't have elsewhere. So for example, in the United States, what you can have is you can say, fine, we respect all religions, which means that we do respect your right to proselytize, but we also understand that you don't want to, therefore there are certain conditions. You make balances between different freedoms. You recognize that freedoms are not absolute. You are say freedom of speech, but freedom of speech must also be restricted to prevent hateful speech and so on. So there are various ways in which different countries and their states try and find a way of accommodating in the name of moving towards a more tolerant society. In fact, what has happened in Canada, the United States and Australia is because immigrant societies have a new notion of rights. Rights, the way in which states, at least in practice, and then trying to make it effective, in law, and then trying to make it effective, try and move towards these things here. These are not insoluble problems. There are problems that emerge as a result of modernity, and you try to move towards that. With regard to the question of truth claims, and yes, there are differences between religions. But I am going to say later on, refer to the first point that you made, is there something that is common to all of them that we can at least talk about them as within a larger framework, and in fact not make, as you do, the Semitic religions and the non-Semitic religions as the crucial conceptual foundation for understanding here. As I told you yesterday, my conceptual binary, if you like, key conceptual binary, is modernity and pre-modernity. There are much more important commonalities in terms of modernity than there are with regard to this question of the separation of the two. And on the question of this question of proselytization, and say vaguely.
Can you make it very clear how is that modernity, pre-modernity?
That I've come back to. I've already done that yesterday.
No, how is it solution to the problem of neutrality?
The point about neutrality, of course, here is that impartiality or neutrality has to be understood in a variety of different ways. Does it mean non-interference? And of course, in the Indian case, in some other cases, it doesn't mean that. For example, the Indian approach and even the British approach to the question of hijab and the question of secularization, and their understanding of secularization is fundamentally different from that, very different from the French, and superior. What we argue for in education institutions, in contrast to the French, is that what is important is the secularization of the curricula, the openness and accessibility of that. Don't worry about the question of this, of dress and hijab, but because France has a particular tradition of anti-clericalism from which they have come about, and they try and adjust to the pressures of modernity in this particular way, they have sought to do it in this way, which many people feel which is completely mistaken, completely wrong, and doesn't show the question of respect for religious freedom and so on. And there are hot debates about it, etc. We try to move forward, we try to understand from these debates and to move forward to what we think is a more tolerant and humane society on the question of proselytization, etc. They have expanded. How did Buddhism disappear from India? What this raises, if you like. Why is it that you have these expansions here, even for Islam and Christian? Why does it only make biggest ground in Mokla and East Bengal and not with regard to the Mughal state? Because even the Mughal state, something that was not pointed out before, is interested in remaining in power But unlike Europe, in which there is a sharp separation of the church and the state, the relationship between the Mughal state and religious groupings is direct. And the way it operates is through a principle of religious segregation and accommodation, and therefore creating a kind of coexistence in that respect. With regard to the question earlier of how Buddhism disappears, etc., why does Buddhism expand? It's obviously related. And the most important way in which this process of proselytization takes place here is through their connection with state power. There are in all societies two kinds of elites. There are political elites and there are religious elites. And the competition between them is much, much more important than the competition between Semitic religions and that. Why? Because both elites have to fight for and have following, in those particular contexts, mass following and loyalties. And therefore, they are the most important competitors. And therefore, the way in which political elites and religious elites combine and clash and all is much, much more important than the idea that because such Semitic religions have a propositional truth and therefore they see other religions as rivals and all, and that really explains what happens in the world and what's important and why certain people fail.
No, but I mean, see, it seems as though I have to restate the problem again and again. As I said, any conception of neutrality that you can think of cannot say a neutral state ought to privilege either Hindu, Buddhist, Jain traditions, or it ought to privilege Islam and Christianity. I mean, that is a nonsensical conception of neutrality. So what I'm saying is, what I'm saying is, how do you solve this problem? How the hell will the Indian secular state solve the problem of conversion? Because it's not doing that. It's increasing, the violence is increasing, and you can, of course, look for all kinds of other factors. What we're saying is, well, maybe the secular state itself is promoting this kind of violence because of its conception of neutrality and religion.
A very quick response to that, etc. The problem is not the secular state how to deal with this question. The secular state has in fact put forward a very positive and sensible approach, and that is that of course we respect your right to convert, and we respect your right to be converted, but this cannot be done in the context by force or fraud.
Is this stand the neutral stand?
This,
when the secular state allows conversion.
it is a stand of respecting the different kinds and characters of different religious systems.
Is it?
Of course it is.
That's precisely the point. I mean, equal respect. Okay, we'll call it equal, or respecting all different traditions and religions. Now, if a state wants to do that, it either respects the right to convert, or it respects the right to be left alone, or the freedom from interference. So basically, the problem remains. You can call it equal respect or neutrality. The Indian state cannot take a neutral position. How are we going to solve this in any consistent political theory of secularism? Because referring to historical facts and sociological facts is interesting sometimes. But in this case, the problem is independent of all those historical facts and sociological facts and gets expressed in society today.